I'm going to be honest with you, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. If you had asked me a few months ago, I'd have told you that my marriage was solid, unshakable even. I was that guy who took pride in the fact that my wife, Emma, and I had been together for nearly 15 years, and through thick and thin, we had somehow managed to keep it all together. We had our ups and downs, sure, but who doesn't? I figured that as long as we were still laughing together at the end of the day, everything was fine. Emma and I met back in college. She was that girl who walked into a room and just made everyone stop and stare. She had this energy, this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she talked to you. Naturally, I fell for her, hard. We started dating, moved in together right after graduation, and got married a year later. Our lives were pretty intertwined after that: careers, a house in the suburbs, and eventually, 2 kids who became the center of our world. Fast forward to now. I'm 42, Emma is 40, and we've got a pretty decent life on paper. Our son, Tyler, is 14, and our daughter, Lily, just turned 11. I've always tried to be a hands-on dad, juggling my work as an IT consultant with being there for soccer games, school recitals, and all the little moments that make up a childhood. Emma works as a marketing manager for a tech company, a job she's been in love with for years. It's demanding, sure, but she's always been passionate about her work, and I've always supported her in that. But lately, things have felt off. You know how sometimes you can just sense that something isn't right? That's been my life for the past few weeks. It started small, Emma becoming more distant, less interested in talking about her day, and more inclined to stay late at work for what she called meetings. I didn't think much of it at first. We're both busy, we both have careers, and I've always believed in giving her space. But then there were other signs, things I couldn't ignore no matter how hard I tried. She started dressing differently, paying more attention to her appearance, even on days when she wasn't going into the office. I'm talking about spending hours in front of the mirror, picking out outfits that I hadn't seen her wear in years, and buying new lingerie, things that, if I'm being honest, weren't meant for my eyes. Then there were the late nights, the sudden need to run errands that would keep her out of the house for hours. And when she was home, she was glued to her phone, always quick to lock the screen whenever I walked into the room. I tried to talk to her about it, but every time I brought it up, she'd get defensive. "You're imagining things," she'd say, or "work's just been stressful lately. I need some space." I wanted to believe her, I really did. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that just wouldn't go away. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, and that's when the doubts began to creep in. The turning point came about 2 weeks ago. It was a Saturday night, and we were supposed to have dinner with some friends, but Emma said she wasn't feeling well and insisted I go without her. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I figured she needed some time to herself, so I went. When I got home a few hours later, the house was dark, and Emma was nowhere to be found. I checked my phone, no missed calls, no messages. It wasn't like her to just disappear like that, so I started to worry. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. When she finally walked through the door around midnight, her excuse was flimsy at best. "I just needed some fresh air," she said, avoiding eye contact. But I knew there was more to it than that. The next morning, I found a receipt from a restaurant in her purse, a place we hadn't been to together in years. She was lying, that much was clear. But why? And with whom? I started paying closer attention, trying to piece together the puzzle of what was going on with my wife. The more I watched, the more obvious it became that something was seriously wrong. She was always on edge, snapping at me and the kids over the smallest things. Our sex life, which had already been on the decline, completely disappeared. Every time I tried to get close to her, she'd push me away, saying she was tired or that she wasn't in the mood. It felt like she was building a wall between us, and no matter what I did, I couldn't break through. Then came the final straw. Last night, I was up late working on a project when I heard her phone buzz on the kitchen counter. She was asleep upstairs, so I figured I'd take a quick look, maybe see if it was something important. But when I picked it up, what I saw made my heart stop. There was a text from a number I didn't recognize, and the message was simple but devastating: "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. All the suspicions, all the doubts I'd been trying to push aside, they all came rushing to the surface. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there in the dark, staring at that message, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. This is where I am now, stuck in this place of uncertainty and fear. I haven't confronted her yet, I don't even know where to start. But I do know one thing: my marriage, the life I thought I knew, is hanging by a thread, and I have no idea how to save it, or if I even want to. You ever get that gut feeling that something is just about to go down? That was me the next morning. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the kind that you just can't shake off. Emma was already up and moving about the house, going through the motions as if nothing was wrong. She acted like everything was normal, making coffee, checking her email, even talking about how she might take the kids to the park later. But I couldn't get that text message out of my head. The day dragged on, each hour ticking by painfully slow. I watched her closely, trying to pick up on any clue that would give her away. But she was good, really good. If I hadn't seen that message with my own eyes, I might have believed her act. She was affectionate with the kids, even managed to throw a few smiles my way, but it all felt so rehearsed. The whole time, I kept wondering who that message was from, who this mystery person was that had managed to slip into my wife's life without me even noticing. Around noon, Emma casually mentioned that she was going to the park after all, just to get some fresh air and let the kids burn off energy. I offered to come along, but she was quick to brush me off, saying she needed some time to herself. That only made the knot in my stomach tighten. I knew something was up, and I wasn't about to let it slide this time. I told her I had some errands to run, kissed the kids on the forehead, and headed out the door with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Instead of driving off, I parked a few blocks away and waited. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later, I saw her leave the house, dressed in those new clothes she'd recently bought. She looked over her shoulder as she walked down the driveway, like she was making sure no one was following her. I followed her at a distance, making sure to keep out of sight. She headed straight for the park, walking with a purpose that made my heart race. When she got there, she didn't sit on the benches or head for the playground where the kids usually played. No, she made a beeline for a more secluded area near the pond, away from the main paths. It was a spot we used to visit often, back when things were still good between us. As I got closer, I saw him, a man sitting on a bench, facing away from me. He was tall, athletic-looking, and had that confident air about him. Even from behind, I could tell this wasn't just some random guy. My blood boiled when I realized that this was the guy from the text message, the one who had been sneaking around with my wife. And there she was, walking right up to him like they were in some kind of goddamn romantic movie. I ducked behind a tree, my hands shaking with anger as I watched the scene unfold. They didn't say much to each other at first, just exchanged a few words that I couldn't hear. Then, without any hesitation, he stood up, pulled her close, and kissed her, deeply, passionately, like they'd been doing it for a while. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of rage and heartbreak that made it hard to breathe. There they were, right in front of me, my wife and this stranger, making out in the same park where we used to take our kids, where we used to have picnics as a family. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, and I felt like I was going to explode. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I needed proof, something solid that would show exactly what was going on. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I opened the camera. It took everything in me to steady it, to focus on getting clear shots of them. The camera clicked a few times, capturing the two of them wrapped up in each other, completely oblivious to the fact that their little secret wasn't so secret anymore. But taking pictures wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to confront this bastard, to let him know exactly what kind of mess he was getting himself into. I shoved the phone back in my pocket, my heart pounding in my ears as I marched toward them. I didn't even think about what I was going to do or say. I was running on pure adrenaline, on the fury that had been building inside me since I first saw that text. "Emma!" I shouted, my voice booming through the trees. They jerked apart, both of them turning to face me with identical looks of shock and horror. Emma's face went pale, her eyes wide with fear, while the guy just stood there, frozen like a deer caught in the headlights. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my fists clenched at my sides. "Who the fuck is this?" Emma stammered, trying to find the words, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted between me and the guy, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But there was nothing she could say that would make this right. The guy finally snapped out of his daze and took a step toward me, raising his hands in some pathetic attempt at peace. "Hey, man, listen. Don't you fucking, hey man, me," I spat, cutting him off. The next thing I knew, my fist was flying toward his face, and the sickening crunch of bone on bone echoed in the air as I landed a solid punch right across his jaw. He stumbled back, clutching his face, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I lunged at him, all the anger and betrayal I'd been bottling up coming out in a blind rage. I hit him again, harder this time, knocking him to the ground. He tried to defend himself, throwing his arms up to block the blows, but I was relentless. All I could see was red, all I could think about was how this asshole had the nerve to put his hands on my wife, to kiss her in the same park where our kids played. Emma screamed, begging me to stop, but her voice only fueled my anger. I grabbed the guy by the collar, dragging him to his feet and shoving him against a nearby tree. "You think you can just sneak around with another man's wife?" I growled, my face inches from his. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" He tried to speak, but I didn't give him a chance. I slammed him against the tree again, the bark digging into his back as he gasped for breath. "You're lucky I don't kill you right here," I snarled, my grip tightening on his shirt. "If I ever see you near her again, I swear to God, I'll finish what I started." I released him with a shove, sending him sprawling to the ground. He didn't get up this time, just lay there groaning in pain, blood trickling from his nose and mouth. Emma rushed over to him, her face wet with tears, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel and walked away, my hands still shaking from the intensity of it all. I didn't stop until I was back at my car, leaning against it as I tried to catch my breath. My knuckles were bruised and bloody, but I didn't feel the pain. All I could feel was the burning anger in my chest, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that threatened to consume me. I knew what I had to do next. I had the pictures, the proof I needed to confront Emma properly, to tear down whatever lies she had left. But more than that, I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do about this mess, about the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. I pulled out my phone again, staring at the images of them together. It was all right there, plain as day. My marriage, my life, it was all a lie, and now I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. But first, there was going to be a confrontation, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Driving back home, my mind was a chaotic mess. The scene in the park replayed in my head on a loop, Emma's face, the shock in her eyes when she saw me, the way she clung to that bastard after I beat him senseless. I felt like I was in a nightmare, but no matter how much I wanted to wake up, I couldn't. This was my life now, and I had to face it. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. The kids were in their rooms, probably playing video games or watching TV, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I didn't see Emma anywhere, which didn't surprise me. She knew I was coming back, and she was probably trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor, how to explain away what I'd just seen. But there was no explaining it away, no making it better. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to calm down. My hands were still shaking, the adrenaline from the fight slowly wearing off, leaving behind a throbbing pain in my knuckles. I looked down at them, bruised, bloody, and swollen. But that pain was nothing compared to what was tearing me apart inside. Finally, I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs. She walked into the kitchen, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red from crying. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me like she didn't know what to say. But I wasn't about to make this easy for her. "Who is he, Emma?" I asked, my voice cold, detached. I didn't want to show her how much this was killing me, how much I was hurting. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wrung them together. "Mike." "I can explain," she started, but I cut her off with a harsh laugh. "Explain?" I echoed, shaking my head. "What the fuck is there to explain, Emma? I saw you. I saw you with him." She flinched at my words, her eyes filling with tears again. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not what I think?" I repeated, my anger flaring up again. "I watched you kiss him, Emma. I have pictures of you two together. So don't fucking stand there and tell me it's not what I think." She tried to take a step toward me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You don't get to come near me. You don't get to touch me after what you did." Emma's shoulders slumped, and she looked like she was about to collapse right there on the kitchen floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Mike." "Sorry?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "You're sorry? That's what you have to say? Sorry doesn't cut it, Emma. Sorry doesn't fix this." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, but I couldn't find an ounce of sympathy in me. "It was a mistake," she choked out. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Bullshit," I spat. "Don't you fucking lie to me, Emma. Don't you dare stand there and act like this was some accident. You knew exactly what you were doing." Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "I was lonely," she cried. "I was confused. I didn't know what I was doing." "Lonely?" I repeated, disbelief coloring my tone. "Confused? You think that justifies sneaking around behind my back? You think that gives you the right to fuck around with some other guy?" She shook her head, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I never slept with him, Mike. I swear, it never got that far." I stared at her, my mind reeling. Could she be telling the truth? Did it even matter? "Do you think that makes it better?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think that makes this okay? The lies, the sneaking around, the kissing? Jesus Christ, Emma, how could you do this to us? To our family?" She dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't want to hurt you," she cried. "I didn't want this to happen." "Well, guess what?" I shot back. "You did hurt me. You tore our fucking life apart. So you better start talking, Emma. I want to know everything. Who is he? How long has this been going on?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she started talking, the words spilling out of her in a flood of guilt and shame. "His name is Greg," she admitted, her voice trembling. "He's someone I met at work." "Greg," I repeated, my mind trying to process this new information. "And how long, Emma? How long have you been lying to me?" "A few months," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It started out innocent. Just talking, nothing more. But then it got complicated." "Complicated?" I sneered. "Complicated how?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty fucking clear to me." She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I know. I know it looks bad. But I never meant for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." "You keep saying that," I snapped. "But you know what? I don't believe you. Because if you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't have done this in the first place." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. It was like a punch to the gut, seeing her like this, knowing that she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "Why, Emma?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you do it? Was it something I did? Was I not enough for you? No, she cried, shaking her head furiously. It wasn't you, Mike. It wasn't your fault. I don't know why I did it. I was just lonely. Lonely? I repeated, my anger boiling over. You were lonely? I'm here every fucking day, Emma. I've been here for you, for the kids, for everything. How could you be lonely? She looked at me, her eyes filled with despair. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what's wrong with me. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the torrent of emotions threatening to spill over. I trusted you, Emma, I said, my voice raw with pain. I loved you. And this is how you repay me? She sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. All I could think about was the life we had built together, the years we had spent loving each other, and how it had all been shattered in an instant. I'm sorry, she whispered again, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice hollow. Sorry doesn't make this right. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. What do you want me to do, Mike? Tell me. I'll do anything. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the mother of my children, and I felt nothing but emptiness. I don't know, Emma, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what I want anymore. She flinched at my words, her sobs quieting as she realized just how deep the damage was. Please, she begged. Please don't leave me. Don't take the kids away from me. We can fix this. I can fix this. Fix it? I repeated, shaking my head. How, Emma? How do you fix something like this? How do you put back together what you've broken? I'll do whatever it takes, she pleaded, crawling toward me on her knees, her hands reaching out to touch me. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll cut off all contact with Greg. Just, please don't leave me. I took a step back, out of her reach, my heart breaking all over again. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice shaking. I need time to think. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. Mike, please. Don't go. We can talk about this. We can work it out. But I was already turning away, heading for the door. I couldn't be in the same room as her, couldn't look at her without feeling like I was going to lose it. I need some space, Emma, I said, my hand on the doorknob. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. I didn't wait for her response. I just walked out, the door slamming shut behind me as I left her there, crying on the kitchen floor. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, in that life, for 1 second longer. The drive away from the house was a blur. My mind was a storm of anger, betrayal, and hurt, swirling around so fast I could hardly think straight. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. The image of Emma on her knees, crying and begging, kept flashing in my mind, but it didn't soften my resolve. If anything, it made me angrier. How could she think that a few tears would make up for what she did? I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm down, but the rage inside me only grew stronger. I couldn't let her get away with this. I couldn't just walk away and pretend like it didn't happen. She had betrayed me, humiliated me, and destroyed the life we had built together. And now, she was going to pay. An idea started to form in my mind, one that was as cruel as it was satisfying. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative, wasn't going to let her play the victim and spin this in her favor. No, I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I was going to expose her for the cheating, lying woman she really was. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands still shaking as I reached for my phone. The pictures I'd taken of Emma and that bastard in the park were still there, clear as day. Each one was a damning piece of evidence, proof of her betrayal that couldn't be denied or explained away. My finger hovered over the screen as I considered my next move. This was going to hurt her, and it was going to hurt her bad. But that's what she deserved. I started with her family. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her mother's number, then her sister's, and then her close friends. All of them had been in our lives for years, people who thought they knew us, who thought they knew her. Well, they were about to get a reality check. One by one, I sent the photos. No message, no explanation, just the cold, hard truth in visual form. My hands were steady as I hit send, the satisfaction growing with each beep of confirmation. I imagined the shock, the horror on their faces as they opened those pictures, as they realized what Emma had been doing behind everyone's back. But I didn't stop there. I went through her Facebook, her Instagram, every social media account I could think of. I posted the pictures, made sure they were public, tagged her in them so there was no escaping it. The captions were simple: "This is what my wife has been doing while I was home taking care of our kids." It was ruthless, I knew that. But I didn't care. I wanted the world to see her for what she really was. I wanted her to feel the shame, the embarrassment, the utter humiliation that she had caused me. She had made a fool out of me, and now it was her turn. The notifications started pouring in almost immediately. Comments, messages, phone calls, all from people who were as shocked and disgusted as I was. Her friends were horrified, her family was devastated, and I knew that Emma's perfect little world was about to come crashing down. I sat back in the driver's seat, watching the chaos unfold on my phone screen. It was like a dam had broken, and there was no stopping the flood. Every minute, there was a new notification, another person weighing in, another person condemning her. It was brutal, and I reveled in every second of it. I knew that Emma would find out soon enough. She'd check her phone, see the pictures, see the comments, and realize just how far I was willing to go to make her pay. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she had done, to know that there was no coming back from this. It didn't take long for the calls to start. First, it was her mother, then her sister, and then a barrage of messages from her friends. I didn't answer any of them, I didn't need to. They all said the same thing: "What the hell is going on? What has Emma done?" I ignored the calls, focusing instead on the damage I was causing. I knew I was burning bridges, knew that this would change everything, but at that moment, I didn't care. All I cared about was making sure that Emma didn't get to walk away from this unscathed. She had shattered my life, and now I was shattering hers. After a while, I couldn't keep track of all the messages and notifications. My phone was buzzing non-stop, a relentless barrage of outrage and disbelief. I could almost picture Emma's phone doing the same, could imagine her trying to explain herself, trying to control the damage, but there was no way she could spin this. The pictures didn't lie. I finally put my phone down, my heart still racing from the adrenaline. It was done. The deed was done, and there was no taking it back. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness, like I had achieved something but lost something at the same time. I knew there would be consequences. I knew that this would come back to bite me in some way, but at that moment, I didn't care. I had taken back control, had struck back in the only way I knew how. And for now, that was enough. As I sat there, staring out at the empty road ahead of me, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. What would Emma do when she realized the full extent of what I'd done? How would she react when she saw her carefully constructed life torn to shreds? But those were questions for another time. Right now, I needed to focus on the present, on the fact that I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life. Emma had made her bed, and now she was going to have to lie in it, no matter how much it hurt. With a deep breath, I started the car and pulled back onto the road. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: Emma wasn't going to get away with this. Not now, not ever. After the initial wave of satisfaction from exposing Emma's betrayal started to fade, my thoughts turned to the other person involved in this mess, Greg, the man who had the nerve to step into my life and take what wasn't his. Beating the crap out of him in the park had given me some temporary relief, but it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. I couldn't just let him walk away, couldn't let him think that he could do something like this and face no real consequences. He needed to feel the same kind of pain, the same kind of humiliation, that he had helped cause in my life. And I had the perfect way to do it. I didn't know much about Greg, but I knew enough. Thanks to Emma's tearful confession, I knew where he worked, where he lived, and most importantly, that he had a reputation to protect. He wasn't just some random guy, he was a well-respected figure in his industry, a man who thrived on the image of being a trustworthy, upstanding professional. It was time to shatter that image. The first thing I did was dig up everything I could on him. Social media profiles, professional networks, anything that would give me insight into who he was and how best to hit him where it hurt. It didn't take long to find what I needed: his work email, his boss's contact information, and even the company's internal directory. Greg had made a lot of connections over the years, and now I was going to use those connections against him. I composed an email, attaching the same damning photos I had sent to Emma's family and friends. The subject line was simple: a matter of integrity, your employee Greg, last name. I kept the message short, just a few sentences explaining who I was, what Greg had done, and how his actions reflected on the company he worked for. I made sure to mention that I had evidence of his affair with my wife, evidence that I was more than willing to share with anyone who was interested. Once the email was ready, I didn't send it right away. I wanted to make sure it would have maximum impact, so I did a little more research. I found the contact information for several key figures at his company, HR, his direct supervisors, even a few of his colleagues. I wanted to make sure that everyone who mattered saw the email, that it would be impossible for Greg to sweep this under the rug. When I was satisfied, I hit send. The email shot out to a dozen different people, each one holding the potential to destroy Greg's career, to unravel everything he had worked for. The moment I sent it, I felt a rush of adrenaline, a sense of power that came from knowing I was taking control of the situation, from knowing that I was about to ruin the life of the man who had so carelessly ruined mine. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Within hours, the replies started coming in. Some were from his colleagues, shocked and appalled by the evidence I had presented. Others were from HR, cold and professional, thanking me for bringing the matter to their attention and assuring me that they would be conducting a thorough investigation. But the best response came from his boss, a short, curt reply that told me everything I needed to know. "Thank you for your email. We will address this matter immediately." It wasn't just the words that made me smile, it was the tone, the clear indication that Greg's world was about to come crashing down. I could imagine the scene at his office, the whispers, the side glances, the way people would avoid him in the hallways. He wouldn't just lose his job, he'd lose his reputation, his standing in the community, everything that he had spent years building. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure Greg understood just how deep the consequences of his actions would go. So, I tracked down his wife. Yes, Greg was married too. The irony wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about sending a message that actions have consequences, and that no one was above paying the price. I found her Facebook profile easily enough: Amy, a pretty woman who seemed blissfully unaware of the shitstorm that was about to hit her life. They had kids, 2 little girls, and from the looks of their pictures, they were the perfect, happy family. I wondered if she knew, if she had any inkling of what her husband had been up to while she was at home taking care of their children. I sent her a message, attaching the photos and giving a brief explanation. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't try to soften the blow. She needed to know the truth, to understand what kind of man she was married to. I felt a pang of guilt as I hit send, but I pushed it aside. This was about justice, about making sure that Greg didn't get away with what he had done. Hours passed, and I wondered what was happening on the other end. Was Amy reading the message? Was she confronting Greg? The thought of the chaos I had unleashed gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. I imagined Greg trying to talk his way out of it, trying to deny the undeniable, but those pictures were damning. There was no talking his way out of this. The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered, and for a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then, a woman's voice, trembling with emotion. "Is this Mike?" "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "This is Amy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Greg's wife." There was a long pause as she struggled to find the words. I got your message," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I can't believe. I just can't believe this is happening." "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't take any joy in her pain. "How long?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months, as far as I know," I replied. "I found out yesterday." "Thank you for telling me," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I don't know what I'm going to do, but, thank you." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as she struggled to hold back her tears. "I'm going to leave him," she said finally, her voice firm. "I can't stay with someone who would do this to me, to our kids." "I understand," I said, though the truth was, I didn't. My situation was different, more complicated, and I still didn't know what I was going to do about Emma. But I admired Amy's strength, her resolve to take action, even in the face of such devastating news. "Good luck, Amy," I said, and she hung up without another word. The call left me feeling hollow. I had set out to destroy Greg, to make him pay for what he had done, and I had succeeded. His life was in ruins, his career was over, and his marriage was likely on its last legs. But as I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, I realized that the satisfaction I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. Revenge had been sweet in the moment, but now it felt like ash in my mouth. I had hurt him, just as he had hurt me, but it didn't bring me the closure I thought it would. It didn't erase the betrayal, didn't fix what was broken in my life. All it had done was spread the pain around, like a disease infecting everyone it touched. As I sat there, alone in my car, I wondered if I had done the right thing. I had wanted to make Greg suffer, and I had. But at what cost? His wife, his kids, they were collateral damage in a war they didn't even know they were part of. And now, they were suffering too. The truth was, there was no undoing what had been done. I had set events in motion that couldn't be stopped, and now, all I could do was watch as the pieces fell where they may. But the satisfaction I had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, empty realization that no amount of revenge could ever fix what was broken inside me. I had destroyed Greg's life, and in the process, I had only deepened the wounds in my own. The days following my revenge on Greg were a blur of emotions, anger, guilt, satisfaction, and regret all swirling together in a chaotic mess. I stayed away from the house as much as I could, avoiding Emma, avoiding the reality of what my life had become. But I knew I couldn't keep running forever. I had to face the inevitable, had to confront what was left of our marriage and figure out what the hell we were going to do next. I didn't go back home until late one night, after I had driven around aimlessly for hours, trying to summon the courage to walk through the door. When I finally did, the house was dark and quiet, the kids already asleep in their rooms. The only light came from the kitchen, where Emma was sitting at the table, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the overhead lamp. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. We didn't say anything at first. I just stood there in the doorway, watching her, trying to figure out how we had ended up here, two people who had once loved each other more than anything, now reduced to strangers sharing the same space. The silence between us was thick, heavy with all the words that had been left unsaid, with all the pain that had been caused. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "Mike," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. "We need to talk." I nodded, knowing that this conversation had been a long time coming. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, my hands resting on the table as I tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to come out of her mouth. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "About everything that's happened. About us. And I think it's time we face the truth." I didn't say anything, just watched her as she struggled to find the words. It was clear that she had been rehearsing this in her head, trying to figure out how to say what needed to be said. "This marriage, it's over, Mike," she finally said, her voice breaking on the last word. "We can't keep pretending that things are going to get better. They're not. We're broken, and I don't think we can fix it." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I forced myself to swallow it down. I knew she was right. As much as I wanted to believe that we could somehow salvage what was left of our relationship, the truth was staring me in the face. We were done. The trust, the love, it was all gone, shattered into pieces that couldn't be put back together. "I know," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's over." Emma looked down at her hands, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything. I never wanted to hurt you, or the kids. I don't know what I was thinking. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her, that we could find a way to move past this, but the words wouldn't come. The betrayal was still too fresh, the wounds too deep. All I could do was sit there, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. "We need to talk about the kids," she said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I think it would be best if they stayed with me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always been there for my kids, had always been the one to tuck them in at night, to help with homework, to take them to soccer practice and dance recitals. The thought of not being there for them every day was unbearable. "Why?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "Why do they have to stay with you? Why can't we share custody?" Emma looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Mike, you know how much they need stability right now. They've already been through so much, and I think it would be easier for them if they stayed in the house, kept their routine. And I'm their mother." The implication in her words stung, but I knew she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was just trying to do what she thought was best for the kids. And as much as I hated to admit it, she had a point. They needed stability, and right now, I wasn't in a place to provide that. Would I still get to see them? I asked, my voice cracking. "Of course," she said quickly, reaching across the table to take my hand. "You're their father, Mike. I would never try to take them away from you. We can work out a schedule, make sure you have plenty of time with them. They love you so much. They need you in their lives." Her touch was warm, familiar, but it didn't bring me any comfort. All I could think about was the nights I wouldn't be there to tuck them in, the mornings I wouldn't be there to make them breakfast, the moments I would miss. It felt like I was losing everything, my wife, my family, my home, all in one fell swoop. "What are we going to tell them?" I asked, dreading the thought of that conversation. Emma sighed, her shoulders slumping with the weight of the situation. "We'll tell them the truth, as much as they can understand. We'll tell them that we both love them very much, but that sometimes adults need to live apart. We'll make sure they know it's not their fault, that we both still want to be in their lives." I nodded, though the thought of sitting down with Tyler and Lily, of seeing the confusion and hurt in their eyes, made my heart ache. They were innocent in all of this, caught in the crossfire of a war they didn't ask for. And now, they were going to be the ones who paid the price. "What about us?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Emma looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "There is no us, Mike. Not anymore. We'll do what we have to for the kids, but we can't go back to the way things were. Too much has happened. Too much has been broken." The finality of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. This was it. The end of everything we had built together, the end of the life we had shared. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into the abyss, knowing that there was no way to climb back up once I jumped. But I couldn't fight it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that there was a way to fix this. The damage was done, and there was no going back. All I could do now was try to pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. "I'll go stay with my parents for a while," I said, my voice hollow. "Give you and the kids some space." Emma nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks again. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding." I stood up from the table, feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. "I'll pack a few things," I said, avoiding her gaze. "I'll be out of here by morning." She didn't say anything, just nodded as she watched me walk away. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, no, her bedroom now, and started packing a bag. As I folded my clothes, the reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. This was it. This was the end. I packed quickly, shoving clothes into a suitcase without much thought. I didn't take much, just enough to get by for a while. As I zipped up the suitcase, I glanced around the room, our room, the place where we had shared so many memories, so many moments of happiness and love. Now, it was just another casualty of the war that had torn us apart. I paused by the door, my hand on the knob, and took one last look around. It was hard to believe that this was really happening, that this was the last time I would ever stand in this room as her husband. The finality of it all hit me like a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to turn away, to keep moving forward. As I headed downstairs, I heard the faint sound of Emma crying in the kitchen, her sobs muffled by the walls. Part of me wanted to go to her, to hold her, to tell her that we could find a way through this. But I knew it was a lie. There was no going back. All I could do was keep moving forward, even if it meant walking away from everything I had ever known. I stepped out into the cool night air, the suitcase heavy in my hand, and took a deep breath. The road ahead was dark, uncertain, but it was the only road left. I glanced back at the house, at the life I was leaving behind, and then I turned away, knowing that it was time to let go. The kids would stay with Emma, and I would move on, trying to figure out how to build a new life out of the rubble of the old one. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it was the only choice I had left. And as I walked away from the house, from Emma, from the life we had built together, I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever be able to find my way back to something that resembled happiness again. I drove to my parents' house in a daze, the events of the last few days weighing heavily on my mind. The familiar roads, the ones I had traveled countless times growing up, felt foreign now, like they belonged to someone else's life. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was well past midnight, and the house was dark. I sat there for a moment, staring at the front door, wondering how I was going to explain everything to them. They had always thought of Emma as the perfect daughter-in-law, and now I was going to have to tell them that everything had fallen apart. When I finally mustered the strength to go inside, I found my mom sitting in the living room, a dim light from a single lamp illuminating her worried face. She must have heard me pull up because she was waiting for me, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. "Mike," she said softly as I walked in, her voice laced with worry. "What's going on? Why are you here so late?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I set my suitcase down and collapsed onto the couch, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. "Mom, it's over," I said, my voice cracking. "Emma and I, it's over." She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "What happened?" she asked after a moment, her tone gentle, as if she already knew the answer was going to break my heart all over again. I didn't know where to start. How could I even begin to explain the mess my life had become? But I knew I had to, so I took a deep breath and told her everything, the affair, the confrontation, the decision to end the marriage. I laid it all out there, every painful detail, and by the time I was done, my voice was hoarse, and my eyes were burning with unshed tears. My mom listened quietly, her hand never leaving my shoulder, offering silent support as I unraveled the story of my marriage falling apart. When I was done, she pulled me into a hug, and I finally let the tears fall, the grief and the anger and the pain all spilling out at once. "It's going to be okay, Mike," she whispered, holding me tightly. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're going to get through this." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard to see any kind of light at the end of this tunnel. All I could see was the wreckage of my life, the broken pieces that I didn't know how to put back together. "I don't know how to do this, Mom," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't know how to move on from this." She pulled back slightly, looking me in the eye. "One day at a time," she said firmly. "You take it one day at a time, and eventually, it won't hurt so much. You'll find your way, Mike. You're stronger than you think." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. But I knew she was right about one thing: I had to take it one day at a time. There was no other way to move forward. The next morning, I sat down with my parents to talk about what came next. My dad was practical, already thinking ahead to the logistics, finding a lawyer, sorting out the finances, figuring out where I was going to live. My mom was more focused on the emotional side, asking how I was going to handle things with the kids, how I was feeling about the divorce. It was overwhelming, trying to think about everything at once, but their support was a lifeline in the midst of the chaos. I spent the next few days at their house, trying to wrap my head around the situation. I contacted a lawyer, someone my dad recommended, and started the process of filing for divorce. It was surreal, sitting in that office, talking about splitting assets, custody arrangements, and everything that went along with the end of a marriage. It felt like I was talking about someone else's life, like I was watching it all happen from a distance. The lawyer was efficient, professional, and she didn't mince words. She laid out the realities of the situation, explaining what I could expect, what my rights were, and what the likely outcomes would be. It was all so clinical, so detached, but I knew that's what I needed right now: someone who could guide me through the process without getting caught up in the emotions. "We'll aim for joint custody," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Given the circumstances, it's likely the court will agree to that. You'll still be able to see your kids regularly, but it's important that you show the court you're stable, that you can provide a good environment for them." I nodded, trying to process everything she was saying. The thought of having to prove myself to a court, of having to fight for time with my own kids, made my stomach turn, but I knew it was necessary. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of my situation began to set in. The house I had shared with Emma was no longer mine. I had moved out, and she stayed with the kids. I saw them on weekends, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for them, but it was clear they were struggling to understand what was happening. "Why aren't you coming home, Dad?" Tyler asked me one afternoon as we sat on a park bench, watching Lily play on the swings. His voice was filled with confusion, his big brown eyes searching mine for answers that I didn't know how to give. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Tyler, sometimes grown-ups have problems that they can't fix," I said gently. "Your mom and I both love you and Lily very much, but we're going to be living in different places from now on." "Did you and Mom have a fight?" he asked, his voice small, like he was afraid of the answer. I nodded slowly. "Yes, we did. But it's not your fault, buddy. None of this is your fault. We're better off living apart." He looked down at his hands, his little face scrunched up in thought. "But you're still gonna see us, right?" "Of course," I said quickly, putting an arm around his shoulders. "I'm still your dad, and I'm always going to be here for you. No matter what." He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder, and I could feel the weight of his confusion, his sadness. It broke my heart to see my kids caught in the middle of this, to know that their lives were being turned upside down because of something they couldn't control. Lily was too young to fully understand what was happening, but she sensed that things were different. She clung to me whenever I came to visit, her little arms wrapped tightly around my neck, like she was afraid I was going to disappear. It was hard, leaving them at the end of each visit, knowing that I wouldn't be there to tuck them in at night, to be part of their everyday lives. As the divorce process dragged on, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the pain, from the sense of loss that hung over me like a dark cloud. I moved into a small apartment not far from my parents' house, a temporary place to get my bearings while I figured out what my next steps would be. Emma and I kept our communication to a minimum, mostly discussing logistics about the kids or legal matters. The conversations were strained, awkward, like we were two strangers trying to navigate a situation that neither of us wanted to be in. There was no more yelling, no more accusations, just a quiet resignation that this was our reality now. The divorce was finalized after a few months, the papers signed, the assets divided. It was all very official, very final, and when I left the lawyer's office for the last time, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. This was the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter that I had thought would last forever. I took the kids to dinner that night, trying to keep things light, trying to make it seem like everything was okay, even though nothing felt okay. They were still adjusting to the new routine, still trying to make sense of why their family wasn't together anymore. I did my best to reassure them, to be there for them, but I knew it would take time for all of us to heal. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life, on finding a new normal. I started going to therapy, something my mom had suggested, and it helped. It gave me a space to work through the anger, the guilt, the sense of failure that had been weighing me down. It wasn't easy. There were days when I didn't want to get out of bed, days when the grief hit me like a ton of bricks, but slowly, I began to find my footing. My relationship with the kids became my anchor. I lived for the weekends when I could spend time with them, when I could focus on being their dad and forget, even for a little while, about everything else. We went to the park, played video games, watched movies. It was simple, but it was enough. They were my reason to keep going, to keep pushing forward, even when it felt like the world was falling apart. Emma and I eventually settled into a routine that worked for the kids. We were civil, polite, but there was no warmth between us, no lingering connection. The love we had once shared was gone, replaced by a mutual understanding that our priority now was the children, and nothing more. As time went on, the pain started to fade. It didn't disappear completely. It still hit me at unexpected moments, a sudden reminder of what I had lost, but it became more manageable, more bearable. I started to see a future again, one that didn't include Emma, but that did include my kids, my family, and maybe, eventually, someone new. Life after divorce wasn't easy. It was a process, a journey that I was still figuring out, one day at a time. But I knew that I was on the right path, that I was doing what I needed to do to rebuild my life, to find happiness again. And as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment one evening, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was still uncertain, still filled with challenges, but I knew I would face them head on. I had made it through the worst of it, and I was still standing. This was the end of one chapter, but it was also the beginning of another, a chapter where I was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to create a life that was worth living. For me, for my kids, and for whatever the future held.